Hello everyone and welcome to our Market Snapshot Pet Food webinar. Today's presentation will be 15 minutes followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. If you have a question during the webinar, type it into the questions pane. You can submit a question at any time. We'll keep track of these questions submitted during this portion to answer during the Q&A. To answer our most commonly asked question in advance, yes, we will be sending out links to the on-demand webinar and the slides to everyone who attended today's webinar. And those will be available a day or two following the webinar. So now I'm going to hand the microphone to Scott Campbell, today's presenter.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion today. I want to start out talking about standards and something called the kibble balance. And although this is a pet food webinar, the kibble balance doesn't have anything to do with pet food. There is a standard of weights and measures that everyone knows as the kilogram, and what you may not know is that the kilogram is actually a cylinder of platinum and iridium that lives in a special location outside of Paris, and as of the 1800s was a standard that was created, and it actually exists. You can touch it. Now, there are some problems with that standard, because every time they touched it, they were worried that they would either add or remove weight from the cylinder. Over the years, they noticed that the weight of the kilogram of that particular standard had changed relative to other copies that were made of it. And after many, many years, in fact, just last year, they decided that the kilogram, the chunk of metal, needed to be retired. And so they replaced it with a new standard, which is based on Planck's constant, something that will never change. And that is implemented in something called a kibble balance that now officially and internationally replaces the kilogram. So they had one standard that everybody was adhering to, and they replaced it with a better one. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is ways to improve the perspective that we take on moisture and overpack in the pet food industry, because there are a lot of opportunities for improvement. And we want to talk about the data that we collected on that, because we deal a lot with moisture and with overpack, with working in the pet food industry. And we decided to take a different approach to seeing how prevalent these problems are in the industry by simply going to the store and buying a bunch of pet food products. And in this study, we focused on kibble type products, and we measured the moisture level, the water activity level, and the amount or that the weight in the bag exceeded or did not exceed the label weight. And then we just organized and collated the data, and that's what we're going to share with you today. So in the first place, okay, thanks. Yes, sorry. In the first place, we measured the moisture of each of these products, and you can see that we had 60 or so different products. They're listed here in terms of lowest water content to highest water content. And one of the issues with moisture content is that there is no good standard for measuring it. Just like unlike the kilogram, there isn't a common way that everybody can agree on to measure it. Now, our way was to dry them in an oven for 4 hours at 105 C, which is an AOAC method. This is very slow and not good for process control, but it is pretty precise. And what we found was that there was a huge variability in the moistures of the products that we tested. So of these 60 or so different products, and that you can see them listed here by first alphabet letter, which is a code for the company that created that product. So the lowest moisture content product was from company D, and they had a lot of products that were relatively low moisture. And then you can see that we list the product name on here as well. And what you can see is that the lowest water content we found was a little bit above 4%, and the highest was almost 10%. so there was a huge variability. One thing that people will ask is it correct for companies to try to maximize moisture content in the product? Well, to a certain point, yes, it is. It is good to do this, partly because from a profitability standpoint, higher moisture content equals higher yields. And also from a palatability standpoint, most experts believe that pets prefer foods that are pet food that's higher in moisture, and it's more palatable for them. So of course, the moisture content can't be too high, or then you get mold problems or other microbial growth problems with the product. But that's a water activity issue. It's not strictly a moisture content one. So let's look at what some of these data mean. And note first that even when we are comparing two different products that are the same type of product, like this duck product here, the moisture content for one of them is 5.88%. And for a different recipe, we have a moisture content of 8.96%. So similarly with the salmon product, we see one that has a 5.18% moisture content and another that has a 7.89% moisture content. So we didn't see that the moisture contents of different similar recipes were anywhere close to each other. Also, we didn't see, now this is a separate graph, and here we are translating moisture content into a graph where we're showing it on the y-axis with water activity on the x-axis. And this is important because it is possible to translate between moisture content and water activity, particularly for the same product. And so what we're seeing in this graph is a grouping of different colors. Now the color corresponds to the company that makes the products that you see graphed here. So a close grouping of dots will suggest that the company does a good job of consistently putting out a number of different products at the right water activity or moisture content. A broad grouping will show that their process control is not that good. And what we see with this company H is that this company actually has a relatively close grouping of dots on the graph. But we see other companies such as F that the groupings are all over the place. So F runs from a water activity of around 0.4 all the way to 0.6. Similarly, we see, the company D does have a relatively consistent performance here, but all its products are very, very low in moisture and water activity, all of them below 0.4 and below 6% moisture. If we look at this graph as a whole, we can tell there is a clear relationship between water activity and moisture, and that's called a moisture sorption isotherm. So, one question that we often get is how should we consistently control moisture? And as I mentioned before, and this gets back to the kilogram, you need to have a common standard for moisture. And the best standard to use, and with us being a water activity company, this will come as no surprise, we feel that the best standard to use is water activity because it is a primary measurement method. It doesn't depend on whether you use Carl Fisher titration or rapid loss on drying or NIR or nuclear magnetic resonance. All of these are moisture methods, but they all give you different answers. Water activity will always give you the same answer if you're measuring the same product. And what's more, you can see that most of the pet food products are under this 0.6 water activity level. In the moisture content terms, most people in the pet food industry talk about 10%, and that's not a coincidence because 10% is about 0.6 water activity, and over 0.6 you can get mold growth in the bag. So this is a reason why people have talked in moisture terms for so long, is that empirically people found that they had mold issues over 10% moisture, but really that's just because the water activity was below 0.6. And it doesn't matter what recipe you're making or what product you're making, if your water activity is below 0.6, you will never have any microbial growth in your product. The other point to make, though, is that the precision of the moisture measurement method is very low in the dry range. This means that when we look at this graph, a small change in moisture is correlated with a very large change in water activity. What that means is that the method that you use to measure moisture, if you choose a more precise method, you can know whether the changes that you're seeing are real or whether they're simply subject and can eliminate the measurement method as a potential source of variability. And this is absolutely critical when you are diagnosing process issues. You need to know immediately this does show a statistically significant change in moisture. And because a small change in moisture equals a large change in water activity, the signal to noise ratio for water activity as a way to look at moisture is simply better than moisture. So let's talk about that relationship between moisture content and water activity. And that's shown here on this graph. Now this is for a single product. It's for a kibble pet food that we created with an isotherm generator, which is an instrument that we manufacture here at Meter Group. And note that on this chart, you can see 9% moisture is correlated with a 0.63 water activity, 10% moisture is correlated with a 0.7 water activity. And so a tiny change in moisture, which is 1%, equals a massive change in water activity. So you go from 0.63 to 0.7. The sensitivity of our best water activity meters is plus or minus 0.003 water activity units. So you can see how sensitive the method is. You can also see something very interesting, which we wanted to point out, which is that the rate of change of moisture attaching itself to this kibble product as the product becomes more and more saturated with water, as its moisture content increases, it jumps up immediately, or jumps up suddenly once we reach that 0.7 water activity. And if we take the second derivative of this moisture sorption isotherm, we can see that the rate of change is the highest at 0.7. And this isn't an accident. Above this level, pet food will become unstable and its shelf life will be significantly shortened, both by microbial growth but also other degradative reactions. And so this is a scientific way to establish the ranges where pet food has its longest shelf life. And we do see that that keeping the product below that 0.6 range is the range where it has its best shelf life. So this is a perspective on moisture that that allows you to establish when the products have their best shelf life. The other thing on this is that if you know this water activity to moisture content curve, you can simply measure the water activity and know the moisture content very precisely as well. And this, so in this way, the isotherm acts as a translator for you. And even if you prefer to converse in terms of moisture, you can still do it using water activity as an independent standard. Lastly, we measured the overpack in these in the pet food that we bought. And here you can see both the min, the average, and the max overfill for the pet food. And what we notice is that overall, most pet food companies have a significant amount of overpack. So this is weight that the consumer didn't pay for that they got anyway. Although there are examples of underpack as well in our data. So we see that that this is not particularly well controlled in the industry either. And there are lots of reasons for this, and that's kind of a different webinar and a complex subject to get into. But we noticed both that moisture was not particularly well controlled in the samples that we purchased, and neither was package weight. So these both present huge opportunities for improvement. How big could the improvement be? Well, we estimate that if there is roughly 12 to $15 billion in pet food sold in the United States, and not pet food, but just kibble-based pet food sold, and that the average input cost for pet food is, say, $1.50 to $2, that the pet food industry could improve its profitability by somewhere between, overall, somewhere between $100 and $200 million, simply by making sure that the moisture level of each bag of product that they sell and the package weight are nailed for every batch of product. So that total impact for the entire industry is somewhere between $100 and $200 million in profit, because those are input costs that you would avoid. So we see that the overpack here is not particularly dependent on type, and but some of them had a significant amount of it. And this brings us to our final recommendations. So our first recommendation is that you get a single source of truth for moisture, even if that means getting a translator. And by a translator, we do mean being able to use water activity as an independent standard, and then being able to express that in moisture terms. That is possible. We have done it for many clients over the years, and it helps them get a much better standard, independent standard for looking at moisture across the entire business. Another is that we find that many companies carefully monitor in-process areas like kibble after the dryer, and look at the moisture content of that the kibble that's coming out of the dryer. But then they go and put the product in bins in these storage areas and leave them there for a long time, and their moisture changes in the product while it sits there that secretly rob them of profit and quality. And then sometimes the product in these bins even sticks together, and it's difficult to get out of the bins, and it causes all sorts of process issues. So areas like this in the process are not well monitored or understood. These are things that our food scientists can help with. If we know the isotherm of the product and we know the conditions that it's stored under, we can implement systems that in real time will tell you and even alert you when a product has exceeded a critical limit and needs to be moved to the next step because it's sitting in storage and is taking on moisture when it shouldn't be, or losing moisture when it shouldn't be. These are, so some companies will carefully monitor processes, but then leave product and lose process effectiveness in areas that they're not monitoring. And the third recommendation is that companies upgrade legacy equipment to allow you to nail those moisture and water activity numbers on, moisture and package weight numbers on every batch that you make. Modern technology partners like Meter Group are able to work with your legacy equipment to improve its effectiveness, whether it's a thermal process like a extruder dryer, or whether it is a combo weigher, check weigher system. Both of those are places where collecting the right data at the right time can allow you to dial in the consistency of your processes and nail those numbers, which has a significant impact both on your profitability and the quality that the consumer gets from you in every product that they buy.
Awesome, thank you, Scott. We have a couple minutes for questions, so let's take a couple here. And there's still time to ask questions just by typing it into the questions pane there. And we'll get to as many as we can before we finish here. Let's see, the first question says, can we get a copy of the data that you collected for this study?
Yes, so if you would like to, please just contact us and make a request afterwards. Right now we're just noting the company names by letter, but if you're interested in, hey, which company was which letter, we can share that information with you. So yes, you can get a copy of the data.
All right, second here, we manufacture to a certain moisture content, but then the product sits unpackaged in a storage facility. Does this affect the moisture levels?
Yeah, so this was what the example I mentioned just a minute ago. We find this is really common. We go to pet food plants and talk to customers. holding areas for products are a common place that products, I mean, it depends on the ambient conditions, but typically they'll lose moisture during these holding locations. And as they lose moisture, then everything that they've done up to that point that has been great, then causes the product, as it's put into the bag, for the moisture content to be off. And even if you've done a great job up to that point, the only thing that matters is if your moisture content actually, when it goes into the bag, if that moisture content is correct. And so you need to account for the complexity of the process and factor that holding area in to the way that the product is made, and then pulled from the holding area into packaging.
All right. Here's a more technical question that just came in. What is the actual difference between moisture content and water activity?
So that's probably maybe a different webinar, and we geek out on this stuff because we're a water activity company. But simply put, the moisture content is the amount of water by weight in a sample. The water activity is the energy status of that water. So it's essentially a measure of the energy level of water. If a product has a water activity of 0.6, that means that it has 60% of the energy that product has 60% of the energy as compared to a glass of pure water. So water activity is a measure of energy level, which tells you what can grow in the product, which tells you how fast reactions occur in the product. Whereas the water content just tells you how much water there is. And as I said, they are related, and they are that relationship is known if you measure it for a specific product, but that's the difference. One is measuring how much water there is. The other is measuring the energy level of the water.
All right, I think we got time for two more here. Can't you prevent overfill just by upgrading your equipment?
Yeah, so you can, and we see a lot of equipment vendors that have great new smart systems for doing that. The fact of the matter is that the equipment that you already have is probably good enough for this. You simply need to have an extra layer of context and analytics put on top of it, so that the settings of the instruments are correct for the product that you're making. And that is capability that can be added to your legacy equipment instead of purchasing completely new equipment, which can be quite expensive.
All right, one more question. And this one kind of follows what you mentioned previously. So it says we have to process to below 10% moisture. So why measure water activity at all?
Yeah, the biggest reason that I can think of from a profitability perspective is that if you measure water activity, first of all, you can translate that into a moisture number. So if the purchaser of your product requires a moisture spec on it, they can have moisture numbers. But if you're using a method like loss on drying, and especially rapid loss on drying, that has a lot of variability associated with it, then the noise ratio is higher than the signal, meaning that you can't really trust the numbers that you get. And what that means is that you're going to have to run at lower average moistures in order to be absolutely sure that you're not exceeding that 10% moisture spec. If you measure water activity with a precision that's much higher, you can have confidence and dial in your process such that statistical variability of your moistures is significantly reduced, and that gives you the confidence to operate at a little bit higher moisture number, still make sure there's never a chance for microbial growth, and increase your yield. So if you need to hit a particular spec for a customer, that's fine. Still hit that spec, but make a more consistent process that allows you to have higher average moistures, and that's going to increase your yields.
Great, thank you, Scott. That's the last question that we have time for today. If you did submit a question that we didn't get to, we'll have our team follow up with you by email within the next day or so. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did here, and thanks again for such great questions. Scott did mention that study data are available to people who attended this webinar live. If you'd like to see that data, or if you'd like more information on improving control of your product water activity or your package weights, please reply to the follow-up email. And that email will also contain links to the recording and to the slides. So stay tuned for future Meter Food webinars, and have a great day.